Hey everybody, I'm Scott Stevens here, and greetings all. Welcome to this Monday edition of Another Perspective, episode number 33. Today we'll cover a range of topics, beginning with the recent passing of Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg, the nervous state of the Chinese regarding the Three Gorges Dam, and the sudden call-up of millions of men into national service. Today Bernie Sanders called for the prosecution of the crooks of Wall Street. And then might Edward Snowden garner a presidential pardon? There appears to be a growing chorus of woke Spotify employees that want to censor their new $100 million star Joe Rogan. And out in the far North Atlantic, a climate change tipping point may have already been crossed. I've got all these details and more inside this episode of Another Perspective here on Metadigm Digital. And as we look at another beautiful September day across the eastern United States, the West still hot, still smoky, still dealing with the fires. And this pattern, coming from a weatherman's point of view, a meteorologist's point of view, is going to remain largely intact for some time to come. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge for those firefighters as we try to deal with the ongoing drought situation in the West and then the developing La Nina situation, as historically that means the West stays dry. And then the East is cool and rather wet, but it's the West that will be entering their second year of substantial drought. So that's going to be the bit of a challenge. All right, the big news over the weekend has to be the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and all of the chaos that has erupted across the country, and particularly in D.C., because that's the nexus of where it's all happening with her passing. And so we're going to call this a developing theme, the tipping point. The multiple topics upon which we seem to be crossing or nearing a threshold, from climate to politics, through economics, through education, through the food stream that we've talked about numerous times. There are many issues as we approach this tipping point. We're not there yet, but those that are curious, those that are looking just beyond the headlines, can obviously see that point is very, very close. All right, so Ruth passed on Friday after suffering from complications from metastatic pancreas cancer. The 87-year-old who had become known and endeared as the notorious RBG, and she had that documentary movie out, I think about 2 years ago, that was widely and well received, and a lot of folks took their time to spend 2 hours with her. She left behind words of wisdom, love, and strength to ensure that her legacy of fighting for justice will continue beyond her life. And a couple of quotes from the lady. I tell law students, if you're going to be a lawyer and just practice your profession, you have a skill, very much like a plumber. But if you want to be a true professional, you will do something outside yourself, something that makes life a little better for people less fortunate than you. Real change, enduring change, happens one step at a time, as we're quoted in her book, Notorious RBG. And then Justice O'Connor. You remember her? Hey, she had set the model. She had breast surgery and was on the bench 9 days after her surgery. She said, now, Ruth, you have your chemotherapy on Friday. That way you have the weekend to get over it. And that was an interview on CBS This Morning with Jane Pauley back in 2016. Dissidents speak to a future age, and many of us can identify with this. It is not simply to say, my colleagues are wrong and I would do it this way, but with the greatest dissents do come court opinions, and gradually over time their views become the dominant view. So that's the dissenters' hope, that they are not writing for today, but for tomorrow. And that from an interview with NPR back in 2002. And I like this, and I've heard this a couple of times, and I think it's very appropriate for this day and age. And it's kind of sense that RGB or RBG will be a rallying call for the left in the days and weeks and maybe months to come. I hope it's not much more than weeks. Otherwise, this thing will lose her touch, will lose the integrity that was there in the beginning. You can disagree without being disagreeable. That might be a really big lesson to consider as we move through how we approach and how we literally each side will approach each other as we go through this confirmation process. And I hope that it isn't as ugly as the last one was. All right, it is a citizen's privilege to serve their country. When a public servant vacates their seat through death, resignation, or being voted out, their privilege of power is null and void. RBG, having a dying wish, is irrelevant. She served because she wanted to serve, period. The follow-up quote, anybody else got that calm before the storm feeling? I have a sense this just becomes a bigger issue. And I kind of want to throw this back about 4 years when we were at the end of the Obama administration, and a lot of media has been talking back and forth about, is it appropriate to do this during that year, that gap, or in this case, just the months prior to an election. And there have been dozens of cases where it has happened, and some even back in the late 50s, where the Senate was out of session and the Senate the person was seated even without a vote in the Senate. When the Senate is in recess, they could have that happen. So I suppose that's something Mitch McConnell could do, although it would be met with incredible outrage from the left. Questions around the circumstances of the death of Supreme Court Justice Scalia's had Republicans hold Scalia's replacement until after the 2016 election. I bet most of you remember this. The Democrats were annoyed but saw Hillary as invincible when pitted against Trump. So either way, a Democrat POTUS would fill the seat. So they were, okay, we can wait this out. We got a 4-4 in the court. I'm good with that. But they never thought she would lose. There's so much more to the story that barely caused an audible whisper in the media. And the fact that when Scalia left the White House after being called by Obama there the weekend he passed, he was carrying slam dunk proof that would lead an arrest, conviction, and of course an impeachment of a seated Supreme Court justice. Files that contained the names of victims and details on sex acts, so he was about to be blackmailed. Preferred types along with the dates and places. All of these were on a seized computer, and these files went up the hill from the FBI to the Department of Justice and then directly over to the White House. Their political advisors leapt on them, seeing a chance to leverage a justice, and in this case, and this is very important, bring down Scalia in such a way that the conservatives would be forced to accept virtually any Obama appointee. So when Scalia arrived on that fateful last weekend of his life in Houston and then chartered a plane after ditching his U.S. Marshal Protection Detail, Scalia and a companion, C. Alan Foster. Foster heads the Order of Hubers and is co-owner with John Poindexter of the Cibololo Ranch, some 25,000-acre ranch, free for anyone to use, according to Poindexter, free of charge, so long as they are Supreme Court justices. So there's a special kind of people that would end up at this particular ranch, and this is where he met his last day. He had his last night, for whatever means. There's just another story to what happened with Scalia, and that may be some of the action that's going on behind the scenes, because enough people are there that remember the circumstances or are aware of why Scalia passed and had to leave the bench as the story goes on. All right, Three Gorges Dam has had some attention, at least in the meteorology community, certainly in the economics community, and guaranteed if you're Chinese, and the dam is still standing despite inflow 7 times normal, that's 700%. And then with the backflow coming out of this dam now reaching this point right here where the bottom of these cranes are now underwater as so much water is poured out of the dam that is creating some cavitation underneath, and then this back pool is beginning to fill up. So the dam remains in place, but what is curious and has happened in the last 48 hours is this declaration of enforced. After the National Day, the soldiers mobilized in the wartime of the motherland. The following personnel must serve. Violators are regarded as illegal and go straight to Beijing. Yesterday, the National Wartime Mobilization of Soldiers. The following personnel must serve. Of course, this is translated from Chinese, so it's got some of that verbiage in there. Our Constitution stipulates that it is the sacred duty of every citizen of the People's Republic of my country to defend the motherland and resist aggression. If the state issues a mobilization order, the people's government from the central to the provincial, municipal, county, and township levels, as well as military agencies at all levels, must mobilize quickly. For the mobilization of soldiers in wartime, the following personnel must be in place immediately. 1. Soldiers in active service. Stop retiring from active service and are on vacation. Soldiers visiting relatives must return immediately. Reserve personnel and national defense students are ready to be recruited into service at any time. And after receiving the notice, they must report to the designated place on time. And 3, according to the needs of wartime, the State Council and Central Military Commission may decide to recruit male citizens between 36 and 45 years of age to serve in the active service. The time for active service is determined by the State Council and the Central Military Commission. Go. So, summary, all male citizens 46 to 45 mobilized. And this post came out first, this one somewhat later. But what is interesting about the dam, if that is to be the focus of this call to action, is that all the live stream cameras from above the dam, only below the dam, all of the cameras above the dam are now offline. Only 1 or 2, I could only find 1 camera below stream, are now reporting or showing live images of the Three Gorges Dam. So this call up in continued anticipation and preparation for a crisis of some sort on a national scale. The other side of this, we're going to go to Taiwan, where 21 years ago, they had a 7.6 earthquake. But in a way, there was a person on Twitter, and I meant to grab this tweet today to share it with you, that she was declared herself the ambassador from Taiwan to the United States. And for several decades, we have had a one China policy with Taiwan. What appears to be happening is Taiwan, once again, has declared independence from China. Remember, when the revolution happened in the late 1940s, there were patriots, if you will, fled China and set up a republic in Taiwan. And it was allowed to remain there. They were allowed to have that designated safe zone. But for a woman to now stand up and claim to be Taiwan's ambassador to the United States is a direct affront to China, essentially declaring an independent government that could then be recognized by the UN, or more importantly, in many ways, by the United States herself. And with that, because we have been content to sell arms with Taiwan, most of the weaponizations or weapons that Taiwan has are American made. And there were, I believe, 6 or 7 weapon systems pushed into Taiwan within the last 30 days. So it's as if a conflict is imminent, and that may be the reason for the call-up in combination with what may happen or go down with the Three Gorges Dam. So there are 2 issues China's going to be failing with, and probably there's several more. But one will be the Three Gorges Dam and its failure or ability to back down from this near catastrophic breakage, and then an issue with Taiwan. When China flew a sortie of bombers over the line, decidedly inside Taiwan's airspace, Taiwan over the weekend scrambled fighters to go up and meet them. So there was a standoff over the skies over Taiwan. So this is big. And I just have the sense that we'll be dealing with these issues simultaneously, because that's how war goes. One item breaks the logjam, and then everything else follows in rather quick succession. And this is how the fog of any war develops. It one big shock, and now you've got to react and then act, and not necessarily, because if you're reacting, then someone's ahead of the game. Someone's ahead of you on this, so you need to be able to act first. All right, I came across this from the former presidential candidate Bernie Sanders today. Here's a radical idea. Instead of arresting poor Americans disproportionately, African American and Latino, for possessing marijuana, let's start prosecuting the crooks on Wall Street for laundering money for drug cartels suspected in terrorist and corrupt foreign officials. And I thought this was kindly a timely tweet from former presidential candidate Bernie, because what then I saw on the news today was a story released by BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed was able to release some FinCEN, if you want to go hashtag FINCEN files, how Deutsche Bank let crooked clients run rampant. And it wasn't just Deutsche Bank. There were other banks involved in this. HSBC was the other biggie. But what it looks like one of the biggest leaks of private banking records since the Panama Papers, BuzzFeed News have published a lengthy investigation into how the world's biggest banks allowed dirty money from organized criminals, drug cartels, and terror groups like Al-Qaeda and Taliban to flow through their networks. And I'm sure Al-Qaeda and Taliban are just like this big compared to the other corruption that is allowed to go through there. The FinCEN files, as BuzzFeed calls them, offers a never-seen-before picture of corruption and complicity. And this is about the complicity. A lengthy investigation in the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, the same group that handled the Mosaic Fonseca leaks. And instead of combating financial crime, the current system of requiring banks to report all suspicious transactions to FinCEN simply allows the money laundering to flourish while ensuring that any enforcement will be a whack-of-mole variety. Do you know what that is? There are 4 moles out there, 18 holes, and you have 1 hammer. Which one do you go after? Do you see it and then hit it? Or do you just let it go because it is simply so great an issue that it is beyond your reach, beyond your scope to be able to control and mitigate this? The other part of it is that, as we saw in the 2008 and 9 banking crisis, that there was no enforcement. Nobody, at least in the States, Iceland they did. I believe Iceland was the only nation that actually clamped down on it and called these bankers accountable for broken laws. And that certainly didn't happen in the States. And this was my hope that when we went from Bush 2 to Obama, that some of that would have happened. But absolutely nothing did. And by 2010, and certainly by 2011, it was apparent that the change on the outside mode and change on the outside was allowed to occur and indeed was encouraged to happen. But continuity on the inside was the name of the game. And that's what was so important. And not having voted for the president, the current president, but you can see how there's something wrong on the inside because they are livid with him with everything that he does. Nothing can be done right. And so it's like that continuity on the inside between the Bushes and the Clintons and the Obamas, that was broken. Something happened 4 years ago that annoyed some people to no end. So essentially, laws that were meant to stop financial crime have instead allowed it to flourish. So long as a bank files a notice that it may be facilitating criminal activity, it all but immunizes itself and its executives from criminal prosecution. The suspicious activity alert effectively gives them a free pass to keep moving the money and collecting the fees. This is the key right there. The law's in place. The banks do exactly what they're supposed to do. They alert the financial cops, and then nothing happens. Nothing happens. So if the banks had, say, used Bitcoin, some traceable currency, because they keep talking about Bitcoin being, the source of all those problems. It's used in the dark web. No, it's cash. Come on, guys, wake up. It's cash. Trillions and trillions of dollars of cash moved over into British islands. And that's where the money sits. Siphoned out of developing countries, siphoned from drug lords, skimmed off the top of this, that, and the other. That's where it all ends up. The Brits were glad to let go of the big land empire as long as they could have the financial empire. Then they have the money. So the banks had used, say, something traceable and accountable like Bitcoin, all transactions would and could have been seen and tracked. So for far less than the 20 plus years that these laws have been in effect would have long passed before greater awareness of the criminality could have passed. So HSBC, Standard Charter, both are featured heavily in the report, and the transgressions involving both banks from around 2012 were cited as helping spur a massive surge of banks selling because of these suspicious activities reports. So there's the ticker of HSBC, and then HSBC, all right, now moving down at a 25-year low, tracing their stock price back to the first quarter of 1996. Deutsche Bank, meanwhile, was shown to have processed $1.3 trillion in suspicious transactions between the late 90s and 2017. All told, the documents obtained by BuzzFeed and shared with the ICIJ showed the banks moving more than $2 trillion in suspicious funds. So that really is where it comes back to where, we know we did our part, but then the regulator turned a blind eye. We see that with the FDA. We've seen that with the EPA. We see that with the Securities Exchange Commission. That seems to be what government is for. We have the laws passed by Congress to stop this kind of activity, but the watchdogs have been so corrupted by the industry that they're looking over that we end up with Boeing planes crashing because of shoddy, poor workmanship and bad software engineering, that we have to ground the fleet for a year and a half because the regulators and the regulations and the doers are so in bed at this particular time. It's just kind of scary. All right, Edward Snowden. We all know the name, and he was back in the news recently. Former NSA intelligence officer turned whistleblower. Former CIA contractor. This is important. Former CIA contractor turned whistleblower, shocked the world when he revealed the misdeeds of the U.S. intelligence community and its allies. Now living in Russia, he's a noted privacy advocate and an author who serves as the president of the Freedom of the Press Foundation. What is curious is that he was revealing the NSA's warrantless domestic surveillance programs, again established while we had continuity on the inside. And it was a CIA op telling on the NSA. And so we have this internal friction between these intelligence agencies. The CIA working in the outer world, but also at home, and the NSA collecting supposedly also, non-domestic intelligence. They're supposed to be outside this country, but then we've got agreements with Britain, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, the Five Eyes. And so if the United States needs to spy on somebody in Missouri, then we get the Brits or the New Zealands, the Kiwis or the Aussies to do it and then they send the data back to the agency so they can legally so they can get the information they need legally. There's always a roundabout way to do it. It's called umbrella collection. So the question is he worthy of a pardon? And I'm mixed. I was very much for it. And the more I see that there's this angst and there's this turf war going on between the two agencies, I'm undecided. I just have decided that I don't know enough to have an opinion on it one way or another. But what I do know is those who he worked for definitely don't need to be pardoned. They need to be questioned because of, Snowden wasn't lying. He was just giving a trove of data to the public so we could know what they were doing. But when we get to Michael Hayden, we get to Clapper, we get to Brennan. Now they're the ones that I'm very curious to see how the John Durham investigation, the investigative general is going to come up and decide, do these guys need to be before a grand jury? And that I would like to see. All right, guys, good to see you over there. Great topic. Vicky, yes, Susie. Events, response, outcome. There's always a reason, Susie. And there's a reason why this COVID is happening. And it's deep. It's multi-layered, and it's such an opportunity for the controllers to get a greater control over our lives, over our communications, but most importantly, over our heads, over our thinking processes, over how we assess a set of data and then integrate it and create an opinion, a point of view, an action. And that's what they're most desperate to hold on to. And this is why they're so annoyed at Joe Rogan. Spotify employees demanding direct editorial oversight over Joe Rogan podcasts before they're published. Now you know why Twitter and Facebook have so much censorship going on? Because we have this revolving door of people from politics going in and then sitting on these Silicon Valley board of directors, compliance control, You need this person to have a job. We can create something for them to do over here just to keep the narrative in check. So a group of Spotify staffers are now reportedly pushing to introduce direct editing oversight over the Joe Rogan Experience before the episodes go live. That includes content flags, trigger warnings, references to fact-checked information, or simply refusing to publish an episode at all. The demands follow a string of controversial comments by Joe Rogan, who has lured to Spotify in a massive $100 million deal. Rogan's appealed to millions of listeners in his unfiltered and irreverent approach, although that style apparently isn't sitting well with an activist group inside Spotify. This has reportedly gone all the way to the top of Spotify, although Spotify CEO Daniel Ek appears to be pushing back. Thank you, Daniel. from a business standpoint, the reason is fairly obvious. Rogan's audience likes his direct, unedited style and could quickly abandon the comedian podcaster if he is edited. And that may explain why Scher's podcast is still live, although the strange development emerged earlier today. In a completely uncharacteristic fashion, Joe Rogan issued a public apology for comments made during an interview with Douglas Murray, in that he was talking about arsonists in Oregon and whether or not that had actually happened. And we know that now that some people had actually been arrested for starting some of those fires. Certainly not all of them. The lightning has its way. That power up there, has a way of getting what it wants done, whether it's by human hands or from an act of nature. Those things can get done. Another cute, interesting story I came across today was a bat on the back of a quarter. I'm like, are you kidding me? But then, I'm looking through my change, and we don't hit the stores as often as we used to, so I'm not seeing change coming out of my pocket. And there's actually 2 bats there. I couldn't believe it. They're like, did they really do this? And then stamp it with 2020? Yep. A national park, American Samoa 2020, so that there's more than one resource that's shown up with bats. And so I wanted to say, is this just a bat coincidence, or just a message from the planners that all is just as it should be? The original poster of the thread stated, "As above, so below." And when looking at the 2 inverted bats on the backside of the quarter, it just all made sense. Has anybody over there seen these new bat quarters yet? I haven't. So when I come across one, I will absolutely get one. All right, so we'll kind of wind this down as we lead into our guest coming up on Wednesday. Climate is the long-term average of weather, typically averaged over a period of 30 years. Really, 30 years? 30 years? Is that climate? That seems like just the most recent snippet of weather. Some of the meteorological variables that are commonly measured are temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, wind, and precipitation. And in a broader sense, climate is the state of the components of the climate system, which includes the ocean and ice on Earth. Yeah, that's freakishly generic, but the 30 years, and as I went looking for other definitions, if somebody was ever so bold as to put them into print as to how long a period of climate actually was denoted, they wouldn't even put a number on it. They said a series of years was how climate was defined, I think, in Merriam-Webster's. But when I was just getting, budding my observing teeth, the typical or the climate normal period was 1941 to 1970, because we were in the 70s or early 80s. And so it is the most recent 30-year period upon which we compare what is normally, happening today versus, okay, so today was 74 and normal is 78. So we're 4 degrees below normal. That's the 30-year period. But truly, climate is a much, much larger scale event. And if we're going to measure something 30 years, then, it never really changes that much, because we're always updating it to bring in the most recent data. So there was an interesting article that came across. This was actually on Suspicious Observer this morning. It was his post yesterday, and it was published recently. I mean, really recently, like within the week. The Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, the AMOC, is an active component of the Earth's climate system, and its response to global warming is of critical importance to society. Climate models have shown an AMOC slowdown under anthropogenic warming since the Industrial Revolution, which means it's been going on a while. But this slowdown has been difficult to detect in short observational records, like 30 years. But because of substantial interdecadal climate vulnerability, La Nina, El Nino, Pacific Decadal Oscillation, the Indian Ocean Oscillation, there's all of these cycles which are upon decades. There's even another one that I came across today that dealt with asteroids, that there's an orbital relationship between Jupiter and Saturn, and that every 60 years it sends a slug of dust in here. And we deal with stuff raining down from above at a very regular 60-year interval. So this AMOC circulation is an active component of the Earth's climate system, and its response to global warming is of critical importance to society especially Europe. Climate models have shown that an AMOC slowdown under anthropogenic warming since the Industrial Revolution, but this slowdown has been difficult to detect, and because of the substantial variability. This has led to an indirect detection of the slowdown from longer-term fingerprints, such as the subpolar North Atlantic warming hole. However, these fingerprints, which exhibit some uncertainties, are all local indicators of an AMOC slowdown around the subpolar North Atlantic. And here we show observational modeling evidence of a remote indicator of the AMOC slowdown outside the North Atlantic. Now, under this episode, what essentially is happening is we've got a salinity pileup deep in the South Atlantic, where we have this magnetic anomaly also showing up in the oceans between South Africa and Argentina, if you will. It's big. It's a big magnetic anomaly. So what's happening is that we've got a freshwater gyre that's showing up in the North Pole, and it's lasted at least two times longer than we've ever seen it happen before. When this guy gives up and the ice breaks up, then fresh water will pour south, and it will break the conveyor belt of the warm water of the Gulf Stream coming up the East Coast and then heading to Iceland and then curling south off the coast off of Scandinavia and then across far western Europe. But this is what has kept Europe warm, what allows them at that northern latitude to enjoy a Virginia-like climate. But as this breaks and this flushes fresh water down, it will shut down the conveyor belt, and not instantly, but very, very quickly, inside of a decade, then the ice age will begin. And the cool weather will first impact Europe, and then it will spread very quickly, because then the ice will begin to reform greater and greater year after year. It becomes a runaway effect. That's just how it is. So this is important. This is important. Now we finally might have the Yale, I guess they call it the Yale bomb, because Yale kind of figured this out, some scientists there. But something else that was on Arctic Today. Go hit that up for a little more information. All right, my friend Joe Bastardi has a new book out, and I highly suggest it. The first was great, and this will surely be good as well. And I've had the pleasure of meeting him back in June for lunch, says Chris Martinez. He's a young guy. He's just a young budding meteorologist. I remember when I was 19 and all gung-ho. But the weaponization of weather and the phony climate war, and we're finally getting pushback against this. And on Wednesday, I'll have Mark Morano on this show, where we'll talk about the climate and his work in the other side, if you will, the questioning side of the climate science. He worked extensively in D.C. and will be with us on Wednesday to talk about this. And what really set him and me as well was there was a data dump that happened out of the University of East Anglia back in 2009. It was all of these emails between the climate scientists stateside in Europe, just all around the planet. And there were so many truth bombs in there that from 2009 on, I became a devout questioner of the settled science. Because if you could tell somebody we've already decided this, then, you're over there. You're out of the game. You're not a participant in that. And that's what they've termed a denier. And climate science is very, very different than, say, gravity science, where there is gravity as a constant. You can measure it. You drop something, it's going to have a certain weight, it'll accelerate at a certain pace, and its effects are known. And this is how we can send a satellite from the surface of the Earth and then just skim the moon, or hit Mars, or hit Jupiter, or hit Pluto, or hit some object far in the distance solar system, is because the science is known. And we can't do that yet with climate. And if we could, there would be no need for the weatherman. Completely zero need. Because you could get on your phone minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, for days and weeks in the future, your forecast. It would just be there if the science were known. But there's too many variables, too many unknowns. We are like 18th century medicine when it comes to meteorology and the climate system. And when we realize and understand how the invisible deals with the visible universe, then we're going to make some incredibly monumental leaps into the true beginning of the 21st century. So that's what's coming up in the next episode, Wednesday at 6 o'clock. In the meantime, here on Metadigm Digital, we've got Vicky's Coffee Break Show at 11 o'clock Mountain Time, weekdays, and Tracy Wilson has her Unlocked show on days alternating mine. On stateside, it's Tuesday, Thursday. In Australia, it is Wednesday, Friday, and then I'm here on Monday and Wednesday. So we are looking at kind of that poll shit, Casey. Not yet. Not yet. I think the day will come. We'll probably be here to see that. And it's going to be a humbling, and in some way kind of a terrifying experience because it'll be so big. And that's just part of science understanding the larger cycles. And that is what has been scrubbed from our history, is the cataclysmic events which happen like clockwork. So if they happen like clockwork, the only thing out there that is clockwork are orbital mechanics. It's fascinating that one solar precession where the North Star is the North Star now, but then it sweeps out to Vega and then across a whole other set of stars. But then in 26,000 some odd hundred years, we're back to Polaris, back to the North Star. And that number of years for that one sweep is the number of light years between Earth and the center of the galaxy. So what happens every 26 some odd thousand years at the center of the galaxy that at the speed of light then arrives here? What major event, what burst, what controlling resonance wave could arrive from the center of our galaxy every 26,000 years? And maybe there's a harmonics where there's halves, thirds, and quarters involved as well. And that would, let's just say that controlling resonance that we are a part of would then explain some of the fascinating resonances between Earth and Venus's 8-to-5 ratios, 5/8. We looked at, all the way through the solar system. There's a little book called A Little Book of Coincidences. And page by page by page, it goes through some very curious numeric coincidences. There are none, across the solar system, and numbers and orbits and relationships and ratios, and how music and chords and sounds all relate through to each one of our planets' periodicity and relationship with the others. What do I think about blood moons? Well, I don't want to say that term didn't exist 40 years ago, outside of a moon being seen through a red fire cloud or something. But it's I know blue moons, the second moon, and then blood moons, the big super moons. But there's this, I want to say, hyperization, or they've really made what are common, very regular events fantastic. Let's just say they've been writing headlines for common events. That's not a bad thing if you're going to get clicks and you want to get views and there's money to be made off these headlines. But blood moons, I don't really think anything of it, to be honest with you. We've seen so many and we're still here. We're still here. All right, guys, we'll come back on Wednesday, and let's have an interesting discussion with this guy. He's been on a lot of news services, and he's outspoken, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that, a man of conviction, to be on the outside. And in some ways, progress is never made until we leave the mainstream. And then, as Justice Ginsburg said, you become the dissenting vote. And keep saying it. And in time, that becomes the mainstream view. But we can't be afraid to be dissenters. All right, guys, I'll catch you tomorrow for a little bit of weather. And in the meantime, I'm Scott Stevens on Another Perspective. Have a great night.